Hi, and welcome to the Insiders by Durham Lane, where we get perspectives from industry thought leaders about strategies that are unifying marketing and sales cycles to help accelerate growth inside your world.
Welcome to the Insiders Sales and Marketing Podcast. I'm Simon Hazeldine. I'm a sales transformation strategist and sales performance consultant, helping my clients get more sales more often with more margin. I'm also a keynote speaker and author of several books on sales and negotiation, and I'm your host for the podcast, along with my co-host, the one and only Richard Lane, who is the co-founder of Durham Lane, who are an inside sales partner that helps businesses grow their revenue through an integrated sales and marketing methodology. So, Richard, great to be back in the studio with you again and with our guest for this episode. So I'm going to hand over to you to introduce them.
Excellent. Thank you, Simon, and wonderful to be back. Really pleased to introduce Peter Schopf today. Peter is the head of EMEA sales for Siemens MindSphere. Really looking forward to our conversation. It's going to be full of huge value for our listeners. And Peter, welcome again, and I'll hand you back to Simon to get us started.
Wonderful. Thank you, Richard. So, Peter, what we normally do with guests is ask them to just introduce themselves by way of giving us a little bit of background and how you came to be in the role that you're in currently, so our listeners can kind of get to know you a little bit before we go into some of the other questions. So over to you. Give us a little bit about your background, please.
Yeah, sure. And first of all, also thanks a lot, Simon and Richard, for inviting me to your podcast. I do admit I wasn't aware really of Durham Lane upfront, but you have some very nice content in the internet, which I now put into my favorites, and I'll look past that once in a while. But to your question, in terms of my background, so I'm with Siemens actually for 14 years, and I joined Siemens with the Siemens graduate program. It's kind of a high-profile graduate program, also recognized globally. And back then, that was my one and only application to Siemens, because I was very much in favor of that company. Still a big fan. Basically, back then, they had these mega trends, which they put into the core of their offerings and their visions, and that really caught me in that case. Since then, I did various different environments and industries like metals technologies, smart grid, rail electrification. I'm currently now with Digital Industries Software. And what might be interesting, I actually started off as business administration colleague and was quite good in that, or had a successful career, but I was kind of missing the impact I can have in my role. And so what I did, I switched sides basically from business administration to strategy and business development, now finally ending up at sales, where if you do the job right, you have a very big impact in any case. Yeah, so that's basically where I come from and where I ended up now.
Great. And ended up in sales, which obviously has to be one of the best places to be, but I might be a little bit biased there. I'm also really jealous that you only applied for Siemens on the graduate program. I used to lead a high potential graduate program for when I had a proper job, and I knew they all applied for about 5 or 6 different graduate programs, so it was always super competitive to get them on board. So I think Siemens had it kind of lucky there. So at Siemens MindSphere, be really interested, how do you structure and look at your markets, Peter? I know there are various ways and approaches people have. Be really interested to get your insights and your approach.
And there are several dimensions that you need to consider. Obviously, as I'm running the EMEA market, we look at our different countries, and there are big differences between the countries. Are there stronger countries leading digitalization? Some countries are more careful, being a little bit slow to adopt. And this has an impact also on how we set up our sales structure. Having strong, dedicated local teams when there's a company driving digitalization, having a more reactive approach when this is not the case. And UK, for example, is doing quite well. We are very much engaged, for example, in the water business in terms of, MindSphere is an IoT platform, Internet of Things. So we connect data. That's what it's all about, basically data connection and algorithms and analysis on top of that. And we also work together with some of the excellence clusters you have in the UK in terms of future-proofed visions, the closed-loop digital twin, for example. We feedback data from the machines that you have in the field to your simulation models and things like that. So that's really going quite well as one of the examples. But there are different ways to, and structures how you look at markets, of course. It's the industries. For example, bigger markets, we segment according to industries. They might be stronger or weaker. So, for example, heavy machinery, automotive, but also kind of emerging industry like battery manufacturing and things like that. So we cover all of those. And what is also interesting is to look at companies and their size on the one hand side, but also their technological maturity, and to see which ones do we address first and how do we address them kind of with high touch or low touch, tech touch, which would be just looking at IT tools to manage. So all of those things and more like use cases and else play a role in some of the decisions we take.
It's fantastic because it's always a tough question, isn't it? Right? Where do we go first? And I think with things like digitalization, it's interesting. You're talking about people who are earlier adopters, maybe, or faster movers, and then you got the slower ones who are probably going to be on a bit of a journey that's going to require, I guess, a different sales focus, which is great. And on the subject of digitalization, obviously you're a leader in this, and with the comments about the early adopters, maybe my words, not your words, and maybe people are not so. How do you convince your customers to come on that journey with you, and what challenges do you find you face in doing that?
And you put it exactly the right way. It's a journey, and that's, I think, the things we are struggling with also, and everybody else in the industry is this understanding of why you should take this journey, and this approach needs to be clear to the decision makers within companies, within the customers, and that's very often not the case. So what very often happens is that companies start something off, try something out, but for example, they think, okay, when I have not the return on investment with my first use case, I stop because obviously it failed. And that understanding that, hey, it's a digitalization journey, it's about transforming your business, about being future-proof. It will take years to get it really done. That is a very important first learning and insight. And I think that's something we need to constantly work on, to provide these insights to our customers to understand how can you address that, why should you do it. I really like this golden circle of Simon Sinek, where you start with a why in your message and then you continue with a how and what, and that is, I think, key. So I actually also have a little podcast on LinkedIn calling the brutal truth of IoT. So it's this brutal truth to have that understanding, and that's something I'm working on, and I love to discuss with customers.
I love the brutal truth. So check that out, folks. Follow Peter on LinkedIn and have a look at that. And Richard, you must have a similar kind of context at Durham Lane. You might have to convince clients to consider using an inside sales partner for the first time. So how do you address that as an organization?
Yeah, it was really interesting listening to Peter there talking about it's a journey, it takes time. We have exactly the same conversation. So there's no point ramping up an outsourced sales program, for example, and then stopping after 2 months. You need to give it time, because an outbound cadence of sales activity typically takes longer than when people are finding you. It takes longer to create the opportunity. It takes longer then to nurture and develop that opportunity and convert. So we very transparently, Simon, go out and recommend at least 12-month termed agreements. Now, we can do less than that as a proof of concept, but anything less than 6 months, it's pretty hard to really assess something correctly, I think. So yeah, I like the journey analogy. We use it often, and sales takes time.
Yeah,
and that's the reality of it.
I think that it's an interesting one in trying to convince clients of ROIs with a longer time perspective, and I think that is a challenging thing for sales professionals to be able to do, because certainly if you get any sort of economic contraction like we've had historically, ROI timelines come shooting down, don't they? And the CFO wants a return pretty quickly.
It was also just thinking back to when we were talking about Peter's European focus, and we do a lot of work around value proposition and messaging. And so, make sure you understand what types of companies you're looking to become your customers and what types of individuals within those companies you want to be your customers. And then there's an extra layer, which is, and it depends which country they're in, which will depend in, how evolved they are. So you have to do that work up front in order to give yourself the best chance of success, I think.
No, thank you. Great to see the two perspectives. And Peter, when we were having our sort of pre-interview, so we obviously chat with you in advance of coming on for the recording, and you told us that you're passionate about the use of video selling, and I think that will be a really interesting topic for our listeners. I think it's definitely a hot topic. Could you tell us how you're using this and why you are such an advocate of it?
Yeah, so first of all, I love experimenting with different ways of selling and different ways of doing things, because especially in this environment, as we discussed before, there are very different dimensions that needs to be considered. And this success, nobody yet found kind of the holy grail of success, how it works and the perfect way of moving things forward. So that means you need to approach it in different ways. And especially with Siemens, we have a huge sales force. However, the sales force is used selling hardware for the most part and licensed software for the other part. So suddenly coming around trying to sell SaaS has many different implications. It's from the technology point of view, it's quite complicated, but also from a incentive point of view, because suddenly they have been incentivized on big ticket deals, and now SaaS is more land and expand approach. So considering that, we need to make it very, very easy for our overall Siemens sales team to be successful in selling cloud software and these new technologies. So what I really liked is that we have set up some short video snippets, 5 to 7 minutes, about different solutions, very tangible, addressing a specific problem of end customers, to say, hey, here, if you want to have remote condition monitoring of your machines, that's the solution. Look at it in 5 minutes. Does it address your problem? Yes or no? Or energy management, for example. Do you need energy monitoring? Yes or no? Look at it 5 minutes. Does it ring a bell or does it not? And so what you say with that approach is that you need to enable your sales force on a broad scale with hours and hours of, hey, that is cloud, this is what it can do for you. Oh no, there's an update, we need to retrain or refocus. And they struggle with that because of the complexity nowadays. They are very good in already complex topics, and these complexities add up on top of them. So what we do, for example, therefore, is to use these videos, also use LinkedIn, and also these IoT videos, which actually, even there were not so many likes, many people now addressed me personally when I meet them and said, hey, I watched your video. And that's kind of expanding that reach, making it easily scalable what you provide. It's definitely not bringing you to the final closing. There are other steps in between, but it can be a very good initial stage of addressing things, making people aware. I was hoping also, but I do admit that didn't work out fully yet, that then people within an account will pass it on, the videos, to other areas of the account. Because to crack an account, you talk to one person often, or a team, a group. But to really understand, okay, who has that problem? It can be everywhere in a huge account. So ideally, it would be to encourage your contacts, your champions at the account, to forward these videos. And this has happened to some extent, but we are still also trying out these things and improving step by step.
But I think it's a great reflection that, sometimes people will talk about their champion as being their salesperson inside the client. And of course, you've got to empower your champion, haven't you, to be able to sell effectively on your behalf. And I think short, sharp 5 to 7 minute videos that really hit the mark does the job for the champion. Hey, have a look at this from Siemens MindSphere. I think this might be something we ought to discuss further, or and share around the organization. So I think and you're making it very easy for them to do that. So
exactly.
Yeah, so I'm sure it'll start to happen. And I think, like with social selling and things on LinkedIn, people get sometimes over obsessed, like how many views has my video had, or how many views. Yes, numbers matter, right? But it's the people looking. And if you're getting the right people, that I think is more important than, I don't know, something viral is normally funny, right? Or something like that, or emotional.
we have a good example, Simon, of video use internally at Durham Lane. So both for our new business development work through our new business team, but also for our customers. So we're using video much more now to garner interest and to turn interest into a conversation. But we're also, from a new business point of view, using it in multiple ways across the sales process. So a recent example, we submitted a recommendation paper into a potential client. Our sales guy then recorded a vidyard and sort of just took the prospect through some of the key steps of the proposal and sent that off, and it got lots and lots of views internally. So we then also want to do that live, but actually you can't get everyone live. So it's synchronous and asynchronous, and you're able to make sure that message stays true. And I think one of the things for our listeners to think about is, and I've always reflected on this, is that we spend really very little time with our prospects when they're making a decision around who to use. So the more we can guide them and support them and provide them with materials or tools or information that supports our business case, then the better, because we spend little time with them, really.
Yeah, there was some research done a few years ago about the amount of time a buyer actually spends in conversation with a salesperson, and it's a minuscule percentage of their time, and probably that was pre-COVID, so it might even be more different now. But I think, and again, Richard, I think what Peter's saying is nobody's found the Holy Grail. So if you're not using videos, why not try them, right? Because you got to experiment to try these different things. So they seem to be working for Siemens MindSphere. So probably a good one to go and have a look at some of those and see how those are structured. I think it will be a good example. And Peter, in our previous conversation, you said you're an advocate of copy and paste, and I know you didn't mean that in terms of a Word document or email, but more as a concept. So what do you mean by copy and paste, and how do you? It's a two-part question, and secondly, how do you encourage that as a leader?
So it comes back to experimenting and trying things out. This leads to different approaches, and obviously you need to then identify those which work quite well, and then try to structure that, capture that in a way that it can then be multiplied and scaled. That is basically the principal idea of the whole thing. And as we do have, for example, with IoT, you do have different use cases in all kinds of areas. So what we try to identify is what use case works best, what approach did we do in that context, what message rang the bell basically of really getting that use case engaged and implemented. And all of this we try to capture and then multiply that throughout the team. And this is an ongoing process with different stages. As a leader, I obviously talk about those things and we have tried to establish a process in terms of, okay, if somebody won a deal, we analyze that deal, we structure it, capture what's the essence of the sales success basically, and also the customer value and his success, and how can we then in an easy way structure it, first with simple slides, kind of a 2-pager explaining that, share it with the overall organization. So it comes back to knowledge management, and I think really knowledge management we can do always much better than we in principle do in companies. So that's one of my also big topics where I'm very interested in and engaged in.
Well, there's often lots of really, really great knowledge and ideas out there and practices out there. You just got to find them and then, find a way of sharing them. So I think that's why I was really interested in your copy paste. I'm also a staunch advocate of win-loss reviews being done. And it's often that learning is lost in organizations, so you've won. Why have we won?
Yeah.
And it seems to be cultural, whether an organization puts more focus on the wins or the losses, whereas you can learn from both, although the loss reviews are often less pleasant, but they can be super kind of helpful from that. And in terms of, and this is I think a really important topic. My next question, and one that a lot of organizations don't do particularly well, which is the approach you use when you're making decisions about which customer projects to pursue and which customer projects to walk away from. So might, often referred to as sort of opportunity qualification, I suppose, or customer qualification. A lot of salespeople positively pursue everything with equal vigor and then end up getting awfully busy. But what approach do you use when you decide whether to follow on with a project or to take that tough decision to walk away?
Yeah, and it's a difficult one because I'm a principal optimist. Yeah, so I always think, okay, we can still have a chance. So obviously that's probably one of the sales traits you need to have. But in some cases, you need to make these hard decisions and walk away. And we had several of those, especially when you look at the IoT environment. It's a very dynamic one. Companies are struggling finding their way through because it's not been done before, in many cases. So there's not much knowledge around how do I structure a tender, and therefore we pretty early can see, okay, this company might have been influenced by a competitor or else to look, for example, only on connectivity. That's obviously an important part, but it's only a part of the whole big vision of digitalization and what you can do. So if the tender or RFI, RFQ, whatever it is then very structured and pointing to one direction, we try obviously to engage the customer and try to convince him of the complexity that he needs to see, but also to avoid certain complexities that are not necessary at the beginning. And if we achieve some communication with the customer where we see, okay, he's listening, he's understanding, he's trying to find the way, and we can still guide him together and as partners, then obviously we stick to it. But if there's really a clear process and we see, okay, that's not going into our directions, we cut the losses and move on. So that's always a case-by-case decision for sure, but it in principle comes down to, does it fit to our portfolio and the understanding we have of how you approach digitalization, or do they have a completely different understanding?
Yeah, if I'm ever talking on this topic with clients and I ask account managers or key account managers, what's it like filling out an RFI or RFQ or a tender document which has clearly been heavily influenced by your competitor, the faces, everybody just shakes their heads and just goes, been there. Don't want to kind of do it. Richard, you've perspective from Durham Lane on this?
Yeah, it totally changed our world, actually. So we've built over the last couple of years, I say we, the Royal We has built a what we call a validation toolkit. So we're now much more selective around the projects that we bid for, much more selective around the work that we're willing to take on and from what type of customer. And that's had a profound effect on both the clients we win, the projects that we retain, and the projects that we grow. So that's one angle, in that, spend your time where you can be most successful. Is one of our sayings. The other thing, I love the psychology of sales, and I was saying this to one of my colleagues the other day. We had an RFP. We made a strategic decision that we were going to go for the RFP because we didn't have any background, we didn't have any knowledge. We therefore decided we weren't going to win it, but it was important for us to have a go and to get maybe in front of that procurement team and that business. The irony is, or the psychology is, that the more time you spend on something, the more you feel like you deserve to win it, don't you? It's that sort of thing. Yeah, and so we had to just keep telling ourselves as we were going through this process, and it took a lot of time to complete, that actually we don't deserve this. We don't, it's not been written for us. And the sting in the tail of this one is that we've been told we've won it. But actually, normally, and I always think there are the anomalies to the rule in life, and particularly with sales, which is why we do, Peter, I think I agree with you, we do tend to be of the glass half full nature, or the positive side of life. So what I don't want someone saying to me is, but we went for that one and we won it. That doesn't mean that that's the way it normally works. You have to try and take the emotion out of it and spend your time with customers that you can serve well, that you can grow with, that you're proud to represent.
And we definitely don't want to take away the kind of optimism that Peter's talking about. I mean, I do think that more positive optimism does seem to be part of the character or DNA of a salesperson, right? So we definitely don't want the pendulum to swing too far over to pessimism on the other side. But it's just that, what are you busy with is always the thing. How likely are you to win it? And if you are going to go for something, it's like, we're saying, Richard, you're making a strategic decision to get some time in front of a client for longer term development. And that can be a decision, but don't fool yourself if that's what you're not doing.
Yeah. And there's a time versus reward equation there, isn't there? So we can say, we don't think we're going to win this because of X, Y, and Z. It's going to take us X number of hours to complete. That investment of time we believe is going to be worth it because we're going to get the following outcome or output. And so that's fine. That's okay, isn't it? If you can work that through.
Yeah. Peter, you mentioned earlier the importance of bringing insight to your customers, and you mentioned to us when we were talking before we came on air that you make use of the challenger sales approach. Could you give us some examples of how you use that approach at Siemens MindSphere? Because I think it's often it was hugely popular and still is, but I think seems to have been a little misunderstood by people. So it'd be just great to get your perspective.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, especially in such a context of new technology, innovation, challenging the status quo and the beliefs of people, I think it's key. And what I like very much on the Challenger Sale is also this storyline they build up. I mean, if you mind, I can give you one example a little bit more in detail and run you through these processes. Emotion is a very important part of that. Yeah? So if you think about it, kind of the emotional impact on things, then for example, what the Challenger Sale gives you is these stages. And the first stage would be a warmer, that people kind of warm up to your idea. And for example, if you say, hey, sales can actually drive digitalization, because if sales understands what their end customer are needing in terms of new solutions and also different solutions, not only selling the equipment, but selling equipment as a service suddenly, or even output as a service. So completely new business models, new approach where you can have a better relation and longer lasting relation to your customers. Isn't that great? And in tendency, people say, yes, that's great. I feel warm and comfortable. And they might even think, okay, I did that already. I started that discussion with my IT team. But then the second stage comes, and that's the reframe, where you challenge the beliefs and status quo of people. And you then, for example, in that case, you say, but many businesses take the wrong decision to then let the IT department decide on how to move forward. And the IT department, in general, they believe they can do that, because maybe they already have a smart home and things like that. But in principle, also IT departments strongly underestimate the complexity of an IT platform. So they might even think of, okay, I have more budgets, I have more men and resources, but they are challenged very often on that. So that's the second stage, basically, this new understanding. Oh, wow, maybe the IT guy who should know about IT is not the right person to talk to. And then you follow that up with rational drowning, the third stage, where you come up with a lot of examples. That it's about the data model you need to set, it's about the governance of the access of data. It's these updates that you continuously need to run when maintaining a platform, monitoring components, the security certificates that you need to fulfill and else. And so this rational drowning, these many impacts, they make you believe and understand, okay, wow, it is complex. And my IT department is probably over his head when they try to tackle that, or they spend everything on the platform instead of really on the end customer value. And then you come to the third stage, and that's, from an emotional journey, that's kind of the worst situation, because you then talk about real life examples of, for example, in this case, where the sales teams, they wanted these new solutions for their end customers. They needed it because of market pressure and competitors doing this. And their IT team took 3 years, and they didn't get a solution out there because it was just too complex, this international management of data and then putting applications on top, defining the data model and else. And this you can, if the more specific you make the example of the sales leader who was desperate and losing market share, the more is the emotional impact. And I think that is also very important, not to manipulate people, but for them to understand the message and the implications also for themselves. And then if you come then after that emotional impact stage to the next stage and you say, well, but there's a new way. And the new way, by the way, there's players out there in the market that have an integrated platform, where you don't need to build the platform. You can concentrate on the solutions that bring value add to your customers. You can concentrate on that part. Then the emotions go back up. They say, okay, wow, maybe I'm not stuck with my IT department that might take the wrong decisions. I can really have a different path forward. And then at the very end, and I think that's important, at the very end, in the 7th stage, you talk about your own solution, MindSphere in my case, and then how we can help the customer to get things done. And for example, in this case, also after 3 months, we had the machines connected and first solutions with the customers. So that's something that really is, from my point of view, a very strong way of tailoring messages. And you can do that on different levels. You can do that over the overall sales cycle, but also in this very short storytelling, and on different levels, you can have these kind of emotional journeys. And I think that's a strong point of the Challenger sale.
Wow. What a very eloquent illustration of the Challenger sale process, Peter. That was, I think, a masterclass in the process and the stages. So thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. Richard, comments from you with regards to the Challenger approach or the comments Peter's made?
Yeah, I love that. We can probably snippet that as its own little thing and have a Challenger sale example. Just very quickly, we have our own sales methodology at Durham Lane called Selling at a Higher Level. It came out really of my corporate experience in sales, and when I set up my own business, I was thinking, how do I help people that maybe have never thought about the process of selling before, give them some structure and some intuitive ways of working so that I can help them to be successful. And just after I'd started at my first business, the Challenger sale came out, and I bought it and read it cover to cover and got to the end and thought, phew, that's an absolute relief, because selling at a high level is very similar. It's question-based, it's consultative in nature, it's all about value, it's about putting your feet in the shoes of the customer, and ultimately building the story. And I love the way you taught that through, Peter. It's a really good example. It sort of ties together this whole conversation when I think at the beginning I wrote down a note. You said it's a journey, it takes time. Well, you've just demonstrated your 7 stages there, which you will guide your potential customers through until they become customers with you.
And I think a wonderful reminder of the role of emotion in selling, and probably the power of stories as part of a sales approach to really bring it to life. So Peter, thank you. Just very conscious of time, so really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and thoughts with you. Thank you so much. They've really 10 out of 10 for the Challenger Sale Masterclass. So that's got to be worth for people listening into the podcast alone for that. Very beautifully articulated. So thank you very, very much for your time. It's been a pleasure having you on The Insiders, and we look forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
For sure.
The Insiders by Durham Lane. Subscribe today to never miss an episode.